Is it moving you to tears? It is moving you to get out of your lazy boy, put your remote down, and go make a difference in this world? Or are you just going, la, 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 go away? I don't care what other churches do. I really don't. I know what we're called to do. I've experienced what Nehemiah has experienced here. God, I have read this book every year from its entirety, and Ezra, the prophet who bookends this book, every year for the last 8 years. You know why? Because we're living in a place where the gates are burned and the walls are torn down, and there's Sanballats and Tobiases that are here robbing people. This book is real. How did he respond? It was not about his family. It was not about a close personal issue. It was about his homeland, several hundred miles away. The dude was a slave, a castaway, a person who was expendable. Yet when he heard, not yet seen, about the brokenness and the hurting of the people in his homeland, it shook the very foundation of his spiritual being. Before we look at his prayer, I gotta ask you, how do you respond to what God shows you? How do you respond to what God shows you? Do you weep when you see people hurting? Does it cause you to say, I'm going to go without food for the next 20 days because of that nonsense that I'm seeing right there? Look at this prayer. Verse 5. And he said, O Lord of heaven, the great and terrible God, who keeps covenant, loving kindness and mercy for those who love him and keep his commandments. Let your ear hear, now be attentive, and your eyes open, and listen to the prayer of your servant, which I prayed before you this day and night for the Israelites, your servants, confessing the sins of Israel, which have sinned against you. Yes, I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted very corruptly against you, and we have not kept your commandments, statutes, and ordinances which you commanded to your servant Moses. Remember earnestly what you have commanded. Your servant Moses, if you transgress and you are unfaithful, I will scatter you abroad amongst many nations. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though you are outcast, though you were far in the farthest parts of the heavens, yet I will gather them from here, and I will bring them to the place which I have chosen to set my name upon. Now these are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive, and the prayer of your servant and the prayer of your servants, who delight and revere and fear your name, and prosper. I pray you, your servant, on this day, and grant him mercy in the sight of man, for I am the cupbearer of the king. I want you to look at something. Look how comfortable Nehemiah was in talking with his God. It was as if he was talking to his best friend. It shows a pattern of a relationship. It shows that together he and God walked a few miles together. He knew what God would not only hear, but respond to his plea. Look how he reminded God of his promises, his instructions, and his covenant that he made to Israel. When God shows us hurting people, when God shows us what's wrong in our community, we should be moved the way Nehemiah is moved. It's the mark of a true believer. And yet we hide from problems. We're closed up in our houses. We just turn the TV louder. We avoid parts of town that make us sad. Flip down to chapter 2. Let's look at this opportunity. This is where Nehemiah does a Tory Martin. Here he is, he's talking to the king. Now mind you, I don't know about you, but if the guy could look at you and say, off with his head, I wouldn't necessarily show up with ash on me and be sad. The first response of the king was, "Dear Lord, is he sick? Is he sick because he ate something that was intended to me?" Look at the relationship. As you read through chapter 2, you need to look at this relationship that Nehemiah had with this king. It was just like Paul. Paul was enslaved. He was imprisoned. And yet he had the ear of the court of the most powerful people in the then known world. Nehemiah is the same thing in verses 1 through 5. He is giving this opportunity to share with the king. And what happens in the midst of this? He stops and prays. How about it? This is Tory Martin. Don't believe me? Look at this. So the king said to me, "Why do you look sad, since you are not sick? This is nothing but sorrow of heart." And then I was very much afraid. And I said to the king, "Let the king live forever. Why should I not be sad-faced when the city and the place of my father's sepulchres lies waste, with its fortified gates consumed with fire?" And the king said to me, "So what are you asking for?" So I prayed to God of heaven. In the midst of this conversation that he's having with the king, Xerxes, Nehemiah stops and goes, "God, give me the strength. He just prays. I could see, you could literally put into the scripture here, squirrel! Nehemiah just stops mid-sentence, talking to the most powerful man on earth, and says, "God, bless this conversation that I'm having." Now, we don't know the context of the Hebrew, whether it was out loud or under his breath, but he had it. Give an example. This isn't talking to a king. It was a mother and son in Washington, D.C. I was a salesman. Actually, I was a sales manager. I had like 11 guys working under me. I was working for Sears. And I was doing in-home sales. I did one of these, I would do things, I was good, okay? I was really good at what I did. And I was on one of these missions. It was October. I was going to prove a point to my guys because they were griping, they were complaining about, well, you know, people don't always want, we don't have enough variety, you know, we got to bring 7 kinds of doors, and we got to bring all the Formica, you know, we got to bring these samples and that samples. I said, they will buy whatever you tell them they want to buy. So what I did for one whole month, I took one door, which happened to be the most popular. I mounted on it the most popular hardware, and I took the 3 most popular Formica chips. That's all I took into homes. The people on my team were like, well, you're just good. You pick the cool leads. I said, no. I will only run the worst leads in the inner city. That's all I would take for that whole month. I sold all 12 of them. Okay? I want to make a clear point here. I sold all 12 of them. But there was a lot of trepidation going on, you know? Number one of the experiences on this trek was I went to a McDonald's for dinner that night. As I'm walking up to the counter and placing an order, 2 policemen walk up behind me, DC's finest, and as I'm giving my order, my Big Mac, they're saying he will have it to go. I'm like, okay. And I get my little dinner, and I realize that I got 2 hours to my next appointment in that area of DC, you know, Bladensburg. And as they walk, these 2 huge police officers are walking me to my car. They're saying, we want you to get in your car and get back on the Beltway because someone like you was killed here last week and we don't want to do that paperwork again. And I didn't want to have to tell them that in 2 hours I was going down the street and I was going to be there until 10 o'clock that night. So I got in my car. I said, well, can I at least sit? No, we want you to go to the rest stop on the Beltway. So I went around the block in my car. They went their way, and I pulled back into McDonald's, ate my meal, and went on. But anyway, here's the thing. The story is, I get to this person's house, and it's a single mom and her older son who's living with her. Generally, he was a nice guy. But he was cheap. He didn't want to do a single thing for his mom. He didn't. And we're going through this presentation, you know? And then I go to the kitchen, and I'm doing my measurements, and I'm laying things out, and I'm presenting to her, and she wants this thing. This little lady deserves it, okay? She really did. He wasn't going to spend a dime. It was her house, but he was going to pay for it. But he didn't want to pay for it. He was just going through the motions. Well, he's whining and going on, and she is getting to about here with his whining. And I don't know what came over me, but I just prayed out loud. I said, God, turn this guy's words against him. I just prayed that out loud. And I walked out of the kitchen, and I went into the dining room, and he's going on about his mama. I said, so you don't want to do this for your mama with all she does for you? That's all I said. And the words that came out of his mouth, well, she doesn't really cook. She just packs my lunch. I heard the gun cock. This little African lady, he's this big guy, she's a little African grandmama. She goes, what? I don't cook. Who ironed that shirt this morning that you put on when you went to drive that bus? Who packed those ho-hos and that apple, the kind of apples that you only, and she just went off in this dissertation for 35 minutes, reading him the riot act. By the way, he bought a granite countertop for his mama. But in the midst of the situation, there was countless times that I'm doing what I'm doing in my normal course of business, and I just invited God into whatever I was doing. I prayed. I said, God, please, whatever. For the better part of my Christian experience, that's how I've lived. For the last couple of years. I've been beat up. I've just been beat up. This business will kill you. Church will kill you. He seized hold of the opportunity. Nehemiah prayed. Let's look at another thing. Let's drop down in chapter 2, verse 11. Read this. So when I got to Jerusalem, I had been there 3 days. And I rose in the night, and I had a few men with me, and I told no one that my God had put on my heart to do in Jerusalem. No beast was with me except the one I rode. And when I went out by night to the valley gate, towards the dragon's well and the dove gate, and I inspected the walls. Do you understand what he's doing here? He's prayer walking. He's spying out the land. He's going on horseback. He's doing a drive-through. Nehemiah did this countless times, where he would go out by night and he would prayer walk his community. He did. He pressed in. He went out. This is normal course of business for Nehemiah and what he's doing. It should be the normal course of business for you and I. When was the last time you drove through the streets of Wallingford and you saw a bunch of kids stuff in the front yard? And you realized that God was showing you there's a family with kids there and praying for them. Listen, when you see stuff, you just need to pray. When you see a mom and a dad being abusive to their kid, verbally, at Kmart, you need to pray. Nehemiah prayed. Verse 18. Nehemiah shared how God answered his prayer, how he was being called to address the problem. He shared what he had discovered about the community. Most of the people got stoked about it. Several did not. What happened? In chapter 3, they got to work. In chapter 4, Nehemiah had to address the problem people. He was unsuccessful, and he was hurt by the response. And yet, in verse 9 of chapter 4, he overcame the discouragement. He then took the negative issues to God, and God gave him insight. And if you look at chapter 4, verse 9 onwards, and literally read what Nehemiah is talking about before God, about these problem people, you will see virtually parallel Paul's rhetoric in chapter 6 of Ephesians, where Nehemiah is rehearsing, putting on the whole armor of God. You're seeing how Nehemiah is putting on the breastplate. He is literally saying, I'm putting on the breastplate. He is taking the shield of faith. He is literally doing what Paul said that we are supposed to do. Mind you, there was 700 years difference between Paul and Nehemiah, thereabouts. God doesn't change, nor does his strategy, nor does his plan for our lives. Spurgeon said a couple important things, and I'm going to close with this. And again, I want you to walk away today realizing how normal talking to God in prayer is all about. How that needs to be a part of your daily life. I love when kids get it. Tim Pierce is a dear friend of mine. He's home with the Lord now. I can't remember what the circumstance was. Maybe Joy can remind me later. But you remember when Flea was staying with us? They had something going on, and their littlest one stayed with us back in the day. She's looking at me like, Tiffany, when she stayed with us, and I was sick. Here's the deal. Their littlest one, Flea was this little itty bitty thing most of her life, and all of a sudden, boom, she grew up. She's a doctor, you know. I was laying in bed, and I was running a fever. And I was like in that dozy stage between a good sleep and waking up, and I felt this cold little hand touch my chest. And I opened my eyes, and here's Flea with her big blue eyes staring at me, going, in Jesus' name, heal Uncle Chuck. She was 8. Tim was a ninja warrior. Tim would just pray. He'd lay hands on things. His kids were the same way today. Spurgeon said there's 2 principles that surround praying without ceasing. One, it's a privilege, and second, it's a precept, which speaks to the gratitude that we need to have towards living the Christian life. We were not forgotten. My buddy, Pastor Randy Johnson, who pastors a church up in Oaks, PA, says this, that the mark of American consumer Christian disciple is that we have become those who have forgotten what it was like to be unsaved. In 2 Chronicles chapter 7, it talks about people humbling themselves and praying and seeking the Lord and turning from their wicked ways. You see, we have forgotten that it's a privilege to pray. We have forgotten it's a foundational precept that prayer is. James 4:10 says, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will lift you up. In America, here's some statistics from various years from the Barna Research Group. 4 out of 5 Americans believe that prayer can change what happens in a person's life. 9 out of 10 adults agree that there is a God who watches over you and answers you in prayers. The average prayer in America lasts less than 5 minutes. Here's the one that really breaks you. 1 out of 5 adults have a time of extended prayer with members of their household during the course of a typical week. You and I need to be humbled today. You and I need to realize, wow, we're on the spiritual playing field of life. And if we're honest and we look through, the enemy shows himself constantly. I used Oprah as one example. But you realize that for every Oprah out there who brings this wackadoodle guy on her TV show that talks about the 7th century whatever that speaks through him, there's 100 of those every day on TV. It's a real world, the spiritual battle we're fighting. Go to Swarthmore on Friday night. Don't confront the ladies, but go to Swarthmore and drive through it. Friday night at dusk, on any good weather night, the women in black will be there. It's a witch coven. It's a witch coven. They're all dressed in black and they have the signs, women in black. There's a spiritual presence in this community. Go pray with people that are Quaker as they pray to the rocks and the trees and Mother Earth. Don't tell me that's coming out of that. It's real, people. And you're on the playing field. And either you're going to get shot down, crushed, mauled, mangled, or broken. Or you're going to wake up to the fact that we serve a living God, and we got to pray. We got to corporately pray together. We do. We got to pray with each other on a regular basis.
you know? But we as individuals, first and foremost, above anything else, we got to be people of common prayer. Common men, common women who just pray. Who take seriously the fact that God is real and he has this relationship with us. So ended the lesson. I love you guys. I'm tired of getting the phone calls of people being busted and broken down. It breaks my heart because a lot of it's preventable. The first time you experience a victorious prayer where you pray, God moves, you will walk on cloud 9. You will feel invincible. I'm not saying that the enemy won't smack you down next Tuesday. I'm just saying the simple fact of the matter is that when you start experiencing on a regular basis that God moves and hears your prayers and he still moves the stones today, it will energize you. No matter what you're going through, no matter what hardship, no matter what tragedy, no matter what difficulty you're going through, he will sustain you because you realize that you're in the fight of your life and you're part of something magnificent and God truly loves you and cares about what he's doing in your life. Man, keeps you going.